You probably all know me. I'm Jennifer Tersini with Raise the Bar Consulting. Happy to support and host today's session with Clint Parry from Focus HR. I'm going to let Clint give you a little more information about his background, and then we'll jump right into the presentation. Clint, thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be back with you on a very lovely Friday morning. And yeah, I really enjoyed the opportunity for our part one conversation yesterday, and excited to jump into sort of part two. For those who weren't on the call yesterday, I will keep and for those who were, I'll keep my introduction brief, but really my career, 30-year career has been revolved much around helping organizations, small and large organizations, get the talent side of the equation right, and the people side of things. And so that's involved, that's spanned over different careers involving outsourcing, small business coaching, leadership development, culture work, strategy consulting, executive coaching, and most recently in the last 6 years, HR outsourcing with Focus HR. We're a small, locally owned HR outsourcing firm, been in business 22 years, and work with hundreds of small organizations here in Southern Arizona and across the state, and several outside of the state. And a large part of our clientele is nonprofit organizations. So that's what we're talking about today, and what's going on in the world of talent and nonprofit organizations. And as we talked about some of the trends that are really reshaping sort of the talent landscape for nonprofit organizations. So today I'm very excited to kind of share some, what I'd say is some very compelling data, and at the same time, some alarming data on the world of talent and engagement, and ways that nonprofit organizations can confront and address what is happening real time to best optimize HR in their own organizations. So, as I mentioned, I've spent a good lot of my years in working with small organizations and helping them grow and solve problems as it relates to the talent, sort of the people side of things. And what I found most consistently over those years is that HR and talent, employees, the people stuff, really poses a big challenge for many small organizations, whether for-profit or nonprofit sector. So today I want to explore why I think that is, and what to do about it, and leave you hopefully with some very real practical advice, next steps, resources that can help you better get your HR house in order, shall we say. So let me start with the premise first that, in our day and age, I think products and services can easily be replicated. We live in a world where there is rapid diffusion of information across the internet, in this world of artificial intelligence and other technologies. So kind of today, yesterday's innovation has become sort of today's commodity. Nonprofit organizations, I think, do have an edge in this, and where really their differentiation can be around their mission. But even so, you're still competing for limited funds. There are many other worthy causes out there. And so there's only so much sort of discretionary donor contributions and limited grant funding out there. So all of you competing for this pool of funds to really promote and grow your mission. And one thing, though, that I have found that I really truly believe is that really can't be imitated, at least nearly as easily, is talent. The caliber of talent you have. To me, truly, that is your best differentiator in any organization, for-profit or nonprofit. He or she who wins the talent game really will best prevail, I think, in most their ability to be able to secure the funding and the resources that they need to move their mission and expand their mission forward. And with that, all that said, while talent is your greatest differentiator, the conundrum is it's also your biggest liability. So you got to be able to balance that delicate balance there. So And why is that the case? Well, let's first of all start with really defining what the problem is when the nonprofit organizations have with regards to HR and talent. Um, as nonprofit organizations begin and as they grow and merge and mature in their evolution, they add employees. And as they add employees and expand their operations, the complexity tends to grow. Adding benefits, you're adding 401k or 403b plans, and other accrual plans. And there's a lot of administrative and compliance aspects of HR that really create more complexity. In my experience, it's really when I go into many nonprofit organizations, HR really is I would call a fragmented or sort of a piecemeal approach. It's more of a reactive kind of situation versus proactive. That's because, and again, no judgment there. It's just that the HR structure hasn't evolved as it should have over the years that the organization's been in existence. They've grown and other ways are evolved in their development and funding and others or resources, but not, HR has sort of oftentimes been left behind and sometimes become an afterthought. And and executives and managers and often lack training and expertise credentials when it comes to human resources and compliance. And so all of this results in increased cost, increased risk, employee-related risk to the organization, and certainly diminished experience with employees. So again, I think we want to examine that today, why that's a problem, and if there's a better, and then hopefully share with you a better way to go think about that and how to address this problem. First, I think it's important to understand some of the context of the market that we are in and what's going on in the world of talent. Now, I alluded to this yesterday on our conversation with Jennifer about National Federation of Independent Businesses on our call. While much of this data, again, that I share is really for-profit based, or at least the entities they're surveying, I think it applies very relevantly to the nonprofit sector. But I mentioned this, just alluded to it briefly yesterday, but I thought I'd show you the data that many organizations out there, small organizations, independent businesses, are really still struggling to hire. They have well over 50% in terms of open job postings out there, but that interesting number, 87%, are really struggling to fill those, finding either a few or no qualified candidates. And even despite the growth that we've seen in wages, especially post-COVID times, it's still a struggle to find that qualified talent. So there's definitely still exists this war for great talent. And now if you thought that finding talent was hard enough, and it very much is, well, keeping them might be even more daunting. So many of you might be familiar with the Gallup organization. They're best known for the research that they've been doing, for years on employee engagement. They produce an annual workplace report, among other things. They survey thousands of companies. They use their Gallup Q12 methodology. And the data that I've been tracking this for a number of years, and which very interesting this year for 2024. They haven't released 2025 yet, but 2024, the level of employee engagement in those that were surveyed dropped to a lowest in a decade, 30 to 31%, which is a bit concerning. But those that are disengaged, again, what I mean by disengaged, those that just sort of show up, do the bare minimum, uninspired by their work, up to 52%, which is certainly troubling. But probably even most troubling is that those that are actively disengaged, and again, those that are just don't like their manager, feel miserable in their job, actively seeking new employment, and potentially even might engage in some passive sabotage in their role, that is a staggering 17%. So it's very insightful data that should give every nonprofit executive pause to just reflect and consider, where are we at? How are we doing in the world and sort of employee engagement and the levels in our own respective organizations? Now, Gallup, from the research, they noted 4 key reasons for disengagement. One, just lack of clarity in the role and what my expectation is. When I'm coming here, what can I expect? I think the role is going to be one thing. I come in and it's a different thing. There's a disconnect. They also don't feel really connected to the company's mission or purpose. Now, I think nonprofit organizations, that probably differs a little bit there, because I think there is a greater degree of connection to mission and purpose in nonprofit organizations. Third, again, receive very little to no recognition for the hard work that they engage in. And fourth, and finally, that they feel like there's not much a career path for them, or that they're getting kind of the career development they're looking for. So again, another great opportunity for us just to step back and reflect. How are we doing maybe in each of these areas? And is any one of these potentially a gap for us, a blind spot for us that we might want to be thinking about? So you might remember the Great Resignation, right? A lot of articles and headlines in the media and the newspapers about that. And that was really that post-COVID. Really, it was at its height, was that end of 2021 moving through early 2022, April 2022 at its peak. It was really much a shock to the system. There was about, I think it had some 50 million employees resign. And the recent Gallup data, though, shows what I think is a new troubling trend, what Gallup calls the Great Detachment. Now, you notice the trend line of those employees that are basically 1 foot in, 1 foot out, that are actively seeking new employment, versus those that are extremely satisfied in their role. It seems to be that there are those that are just sort of just hanging on to the job, in this current job market, the current climate, economic climate, some of the uncertainty going on. They're just almost waiting for their right moment. And I just wonder, could this be perhaps a sort of a precursor to the next, Great Resignation 2.0 or something? I don't know, not going to predict that, but certainly is very interesting and compelling data to be mindful of as a leader in your nonprofit organization. Now, one of the big contributing factors that we're seeing in this sort of detachment, disengagement data is the lack of feedback and recognition by managers. And there's a disparity there between perceptions, right? If we look at workplace perceptions, what managers versus employees, Gallup found this to be a very big disconnect. There are nearly 60% of managers think that they're actually giving recognition, and whereas only 35% of their actual direct reports or their employees feel like they are being recognized. And a similar gap obviously appears if you're looking at employee feedback, where 50% of managers strongly agree that they're giving feedback, whereas only 20% of employees strongly agree. So I think recognizing that gap that exists is super important when it comes to thinking about our organization levels of engagement and detachment. So we dig further into the Great Detachment, as Gallup is calling it. What's the next natural outcome of an employee that's feeling detached or disengaged? Well, have any of you heard of the term quiet quitting? I'm sure many of you have. And if not, it's really those employees that are just there. They're kind of going through the motions, doing the bare minimum, doing what they're contracted to do, but you're not really getting that extra discretionary energy. What I mean by discretionary energy, it's that extra energy, that extra effort that goes above and beyond what somebody is really contracted to do for their role. And quiet quitting is really just another name for what we call presenteeism. And presenteeism, again, is just going through the motions, being there, but not really being engaged. And what's interesting is that it costs U.S. organizations a very large fortune, about $200 billion annually, quite a bit more than just regular absenteeism, which we might focus on. So, and here's the scary stat: Gallup actually estimates that fully half of the U.S. workforce is in this quiet quitting or presenteeism mode right now. So what's then the next natural outcome of an employee that's feeling a lack of attachment, connection, lack of inspiration, recognition, feeling valued in their organization? Now it's turnover. And I don't think that most organizations really and employers really consider the double hit here. So not only are we getting a huge cost while the employee is there, being sort of that presenteeism mode, detached mode, they're not really giving us much. We're not getting their discretionary energy. Add to that then the cost of turnover, which is very significant. And this is just a few of the stats that pulled from several different sources in terms of SHRM and Forbes and others out there. If you think about, consider the costs of separation, right? Just the whole going through the whole exit interview, potential unemployment claims, removing them from benefits, from your retirement plan, COBRA, the workload that has to transfer to somebody else potentially, the tribal knowledge that's lost, it's very significant. Distraction cost, right? We know then we see water cooler talk. Maybe we see a little hit to morale, especially if you lose some valuable employee. And you may even get a domino effect where somebody else starts thinking, well, maybe I should be thinking about leaving if so-and-so left. Well, then you have the replacement cost, right? Which we know is significant, thousands of dollars, where we've got onboarding costs, training, recruiting costs, getting them sort of fully immersed into the organization, pulling away valuable time from our key employees to do training for them. We can't really underestimate the impact to both the team and to the organizations and to our clients, our customers, the people that we impact with our mission, given the cost of what happens with turnover. So all said and done, the cost of lack of engagement and low employee engagement really does impact the bottom line, and impacts ultimately, and that translates into mission impact and your ability to have the dollars and the funding that you need to drive forth your mission. And if you contrast that, though, with highly engaged employees, you see a very significant difference in terms of productivity, profitability, or what you're able to contribute to the community and to the greater good with the mission of your respective nonprofit organization. And interesting enough, we also see those who are highly engaged, we see reduction in theft, we see reductions in quality defects, we see reduction in workplace safety incidents. So it impacts everything, certainly quantitatively, but also qualitatively. So, hopefully at this juncture, I've made the case, I've tried to make the case anyway, that given sort of the trends of what's going on in the world of engagement and detachment, the presenteeism, that nonprofit organizations, nonprofit leaders may need to really rethink the way that think their approach to the HR, to the talent side of their operation. I really do believe there is a better way. And I've really spent the last 20 years observing, studying, listening, working with organizations to try to help them get the human capital side of the equation right. So my belief is to confront the effects of detachment, disengagement, presenteeism, and turnover, and really win the war on talent, and to really better position your nonprofit organization to capture that great talent out there, to capture and harness that discretionary human energy. We really need to transform the way that we think about and recruit and manage and inspire talent in our respective organizations. So drawing from that experience and a lot of experience and study of great thought leaders out there on the world in the industry, I've just put together, really created this simple, what I call as a simple HR blueprint for nonprofit organizations and even small businesses that I think provides a foundational sort of infrastructure and how you can craft and structure HR in your respective organizations. It's really comprised of three components, and they directly tie to reducing detachment, presenteeism, and ultimately turnover in your business. Ultimately, so that you can get them, right? We got to get them and secure that great talent through a great recruiting and selection process. We got to inspire them once they're in, have great leadership and great culture to inspire these employees, great talent that we have, and we got to keep them. There's so much work that goes into recruiting and bringing on great talent, and it's a shame if we lose them. And that really ties to our having good HR operations. So while each of these is probably a workshop in itself, I just want to go through briefly what I mean by each of these and how you can embed them into your organization. And it all starts with recruiting. And I love what Brad Sugars here is. That I really truly believe this, that a CEO's number one job truly should be in securing great talent for the organization. Because if you mess this part up, there's this sort of chain reaction that happens, right? We know that going through the whole process of getting a mishire is really problematic and very costly in terms of time and energy and the impact to the organization. To me, recruiting is marketing. I sort of alluded to this yesterday a little bit, but the whole idea that when we think about development and we think about growth and securing the way that we go after donors and segmenting them and funds, we really should apply that sort of targeting approach. The similar approach we should apply as we recruit great talent. We truly have to know who is our target, who is our ideal candidate, and enough so that we can really attract them, we can build interest in their desire to work at our organization, and then ultimately get them to take action to come work for us. And so, do you really understand? It's a really kind of a reflective question here: is do I really understand what our target profile is for every position? Just in general for our organization, but also for a specific role. And how much effort and time and energy am I investing into defining that and really articulating that and then going after that, as opposed to how much time and energy and effort am I applying to just running the business data, running the operation day to day, our organization day to day, and or focusing on securing donors and grant funds, et cetera. So if we look at just the state of recruiting today, the numbers aren't great. This is research done by Work Institute, and it really illustrates to me the challenges that are facing nonprofit organizations, any small organization, as it comes to recruiting talent. Over a third of talent, that's pretty staggering. We think about it. Over a third of new talent leaves within the first year. And over a third of that third is leaving within the first 90 days. And I think, frankly, many leaders, employers often get into sort of the blame game of, it was just the employee, they did this, they did that. And they don't really, I think, look in the mirror often enough to ask, what could have I done better to get a better fit? Was that really a great hire for this? Was that the right hire? Was it the right fit? Was there alignment there in our values and mission and what we're all about, and specifically for the role? I think it should give us pause to really consider and think about that. There's a great book, and I'll show you the book here in a minute, by Jeff Smart and Randy Street. A number of years ago, they conducted, which I think is very much a landmark study, where they interviewed hundreds of CEOs, spent about 1,300 hours interviewing CEOs of organizations, studying this whole idea of recruiting talent. And what they found informed their research and publishing the book called Who. And I'll show you that book in here in a minute. But what they found is that employers lack really good process for getting the A players, the A talent that they really want in their organizations. And that's definitely been reflective of my experience as I've worked with many nonprofit organizations and small business owners out there, is they don't often get this part of the equation right, this part of this pillar, if you will, of the blueprint right. And why is that? Well, four main reasons that they found. They lack clarity in really what's needed in this role. It's a very reactive thing, and they don't often take the time to really flesh that out. They have a weak flow of candidates because they're in a hurry often, and they take what they get and choose from not a strong pool there. particularly, they don't trust their own ability to make judgment in the kind of great talent that they knew that they're looking for, especially if many of those candidates look similar. They don't have a great way to distinguish those. And then they lose candidates that are the great candidates, but they aren't quick enough to make a decision. They don't really appeal to what that candidate's looking for, and therefore the candidate is lost and finds another role, another position. So we don't really have time to go through this, what I call what Street and Smart call the A method for hiring, but I just want to briefly go through this because I think it's a really compelling process, and I would encourage you to get the book. It's a great read for any leader, any nonprofit organization out there. So let me summarize each step briefly, but essentially the A method that they outline in the book to how to fix this issue with recruiting and not getting the right A players that we're looking for starts with a scorecard. And that scorecard is just a document that really describes exactly what kind of person are you looking for? What do you want them to accomplish in the role? It's not a job description, but rather it's a set of competencies and outcomes that are defined and that are measurable for the specific role that you're hiring. Number two, sourcing. The CEOs, the leaders of the organizations they found really got the A talent had invested in and took time to have a systematic sourcing of talent all the time. It wasn't a reactive, oh, somebody leaves the organization, now we got to go recruit. It was all the time. They allocated time out of their calendar every single week, reaching out to their personal networks, reaching out to their business networks to find great talent, even though they may not even have a role open for them. They were looking. Number three, they then in the selection process, they engage in a structured series of interviews, what they call the top grading process. But essentially, that process allows them to get to the relevant facts about a person and their job history. And so they can rate them in accordance with the scorecard that they've created. And then fourth and finally, sell, right? At the end of the day, we can have a great interview process and feel like there's a connection. But if we don't sort of close the opportunity, if you will, we don't really inspire them or persuade them to join the organization, then we've just wasted a lot of time and energy. So just to sum up the recruiting selection pillar of the blueprint, my own experience, I think a few key things have stood out and a few tips that I would give and offer to you as nonprofit organizations in terms of what I see that some missteps often or best practices. Number one, time is your worst enemy. Often recruiting is a rushed process. Shortcuts are taken, and therefore mishires are much more likely to happen, which again can lead to turnover, low engagement, et cetera, by doing so. And there really is no one way. It's got to be your way, but it requires some testing and some measuring, leveraging technology, creating a playbook that allows you to follow a consistent process for your recruiting and selection process. That you then, once you've tested a measure and you found that you don't deviate from, because often, again, what gets small organizations, nonprofit organizations in trouble is inconsistency in their recruiting process or even in their HR process in general. And really, and I talked about this yesterday, really defining that employee value proposition. Why should somebody come work for you? What makes you different? Why are you going to offer a meaningful, tangible, and intangible contribution to them in their career that they can't really secure anywhere else in quite the same way? I think it's really important to define that. Okay, number two of the platform of the pillar, if you will, for that small business blueprint is culture and leadership. And we talked some yesterday, Jennifer and I did, in our conversation about culture, about leadership, and some aspects of that. And so I'm going to reiterate some of that today. I don't have, again, time to do a deep dive into culture and leadership. I mean, these are easily one or multi-day workshops in and of themselves, but let me share a few key highlights and aspects of each that I think are helpful for your consideration and application. Number one is culture. First of all, let's define culture, what we mean by that. And what we mean is, again, just shared goals, values, principles. It's really how we do things around here. And a good a good indicator of a strong culture would be great positive work environment. Employees love being there. They feel recognized. They feel valuable and important for their contribution. They see there's opportunity for growth and development. They feel respected for the work that they do and as an individual, and that the ways and methods of communication and escalation are open and are safe for them. We talked a little bit yesterday about psychological safety and openness. So those really, I think, are great indicators of a very positive, strong work culture. And as I mentioned yesterday, if you want to change culture, start with values. Sometimes people confuse what culture is and what it's not. And it's not about events and birthday parties and feel good things. It's not about sort of the stuff that you have in your organization, ping pong tables or foosball tables or I mean, those all can contribute, but at the end of the day, culture is an outcome of values. And so the question for you would be, have you articulated those core values in your business, in your nonprofit organization? Have you then given life to those? Have you articulated those and really defined them in terms of what does each value mean? Because again, what a value may mean to one person can mean a different thing to somebody else. So ensuring that you've not only articulated what those values are, but actually define what they mean and what positive actions give life to them and what negative actions undermine them is very important. And I love this quote by David Lappin. Really, I think distills the essence of how culture can truly be can really differentiate your business and your nonprofit organization, any enterprise for that. So if we're looking at a quick sort of, there are a lot of how do we look at culture? How do we understand how we're doing in terms of our culture and the impact that it's making? There's obviously professional consultants and good professionals out there that can help with this work. But here are maybe a few steps to just get started. Number one, just observe and analyze what's going on in terms of behavior in our organization. Are we seeing trends, absenteeism, productivity, more turnover? We're seeing a lot more water cooler talk. We're seeing more disengagement. Just observing these sort of team dynamics, qualitative things, behaviors, work practices, those kinds of things, I think can give us some indicator of what's going on in the workplace. Two is collecting feedback. And I think this is best done by a third party, very much helpful, but anonymous surveys, there's many of them out there, pulse surveys, doing focus groups, those kinds of things, one-on-one interviews, just to be in an open, safe place to say, hey, how are you feeling about things in your role and the work environment? How are we doing? And are we staying aligned to our values? Reviewing company policies, leadership practices to make sure those reflect who we are and what we're about. Looking for, of course, those friction points that may be causing concern and really diminishing the employee experience. And then fourth and finally, just acting on the findings and the feedback. It's all good to go through this nice assessment, and many organizations do, but if you don't act on it and really do something about it, that's really going to fracture trust. So to me, again, culture is bottom line. If you really look at it, the impact that it can have to an organization and its ability to grow revenue, to be economically viable and significant, can't really be understated. So let's shift gears a little bit now and look at leadership. So great culture doesn't happen without great leaders. Great leaders truly live and amplify and drive your culture forward. There's thousands of books out there, and you probably all read many of them when it comes to leadership, different leadership styles and approaches, etc. But today, I just want to focus on what I think is a foundational leadership style that I believe is an antidote, in a sense, to the effects of, or the potential effects of, detachment, disengagement, presenteeism. Because we all know the top reason why employees leave their employer is because they don't like their boss. Dan Martell wrote a book, and I think it's a fabulous book, and I would again encourage you to read it. It's called Buy Back Your Time. And in that book, he talks about, and I really love how he distills down sort of leadership into really two different types of styles, what he calls transactional leadership and transformational leadership. And I think if you look a lot at many of the books out there, in situational leadership and servant leadership and all sorts of styles, a lot of them really do boil down to, are you really more of this sort of transactional leader or a transformational leader? And let's look at the differences of what defines each of those. So transactional leaders, we'll start there. So we see a lot of similarities in transactional leaders to the traditional sort of command and control, sort of carrot and stick kind of approach. It's very structural in its approach and nature, setting sort of clear rules and very firm guidelines, expectations, performance standards, and very much an efficiency focused, I would say, approach. It really follows that sort of tell, check, next kind of approach, where we tell them what to do, we check and make sure they've done it, and then we next give them the thing that we want them to do next. And so kind of rinse and repeat. And it's a very much an easy, I call it sometimes a default for leaders that don't have capacity or haven't developed that capacity to truly inspire and lead the teams that they oversee. Now, on the flip side, in contrast to that transactional kind of leader, we look at what a transformational leader is. For me, a transformational leader is one that can really inspire that discretionary human energy. Again, that energy they don't have to give you at all, but in that energy is where you get super productivity and efficiency and effectiveness from the talent that you bring on to your organization. And you minimize that detachment, disengagement, and presenteeism effects. And what I think really defines a transformational leader, there's many things we could all have a conversation about leaders that we've had that have been transformational for us, and what really, how would we describe them and define them? I think the work that David Lappin's done, and he published a book called Lead by Greatness. In that book, he really assessed a lot of the top organizations out there, and really, I think, codified for me what the essence of a transformational leader, and defined 8 character traits that I think are amazing. And if we could all aspire to these character traits and really try to embed them and live them, breathe them, wow, what a change would happen in our organizations. But I'm not going to read through all of these. You can read through these, but again, and they're in the book. But really being that purpose-driven, authentic, great leader that has an ability to master their instincts and their responses to situations. They stay humble and open to hearing feedback. Their confidence comes really within. They lack the ego and arrogance. They're open to hearing feedback and really depend upon that for their own guidance. They're very generous in their abundance to give and share wisdom and information, and really aware of the differences, especially when it comes to cultural differences, generational differences, that kind of cultural intelligence, as I'll call it, very aware of that. And again, they sort of access that wisdom within themselves to manage almost every situation that can occur. So Lead by Greatness does a great job of fleshing out each one of those attributes, those traits, and how to develop those. All right, so our third and final component element, because I want to leave some time for Q&A, in pillar of our HR blueprint is HR operations. It's great to, again, have a great recruiting system, bring in that great talent to then inspire them with great leaders and a strong, vibrant culture. But if we don't have the HR operations to really make their experience amazing and friction-free and to minimize our employee-related risk and liability, we've got a problem. So I first want to review some important data that's driving that informs sort of HR operations now, so the cost and risk of HR operations, and then second, some specific ways that we can, as nonprofit leaders, improve our HR operations when it comes to attracting, developing, and retaining great talent. So there's no question that the administrative burden of all things HR, especially HR operations, is significant. It really does present a heavy burden for executives, for administrators in nonprofit organizations to try to sort of keep all the plates spinning, if you will, and do this well and do it right without creating undue complexity and inefficiency and risk. And we all know that complexity is the enemy to execution. So when we look at the cost of administrative HR, significant as a percentage of your gross wages, your gross payroll, depending on the size, the number of employees that you have for your organization. This gives you a very good sense for how much administrative HR is costing nonprofit and other small organizations. Another very interesting data point here, when we look at the cost of traditional cost of HR overhead in small organizations. Now, again, this data is really in the sort of the for-profit sector, but I think my experience has been that it's actually potentially even a lot higher when it comes to nonprofit organizations. If we look at the industry standard of 1.4 HR headcount, an HR staff member, if you will, manager, supervisor, director per 100 employees, notice the industry standard of 1.4 to small company average, or what I would say nonprofit organization average, especially smaller nonprofit organizations, the difference is 3.4 per 100 employees. So we often see this scope increase in HR staffing for nonprofit organizations because as they grow in complexity, as they feel like they need to just hire more employees to address the issue when it doesn't really address the issue, and it increases their overhead and therefore reduces the amount of dollars that they have to contribute to the mission. A lot of scope creep happens, especially, again, you get an HR manager or director, and all of a sudden they start getting overwhelmed. So they bring on an HR administrator, somebody to handle a lot of administrative load, and again, just inflates the overhead. Now, add to the cost burden, add to that the risk burden, the compliance burden. It is staggering what has happened over the last many years in terms of employment law. You'll notice the trajectory. It ain't stopping anytime soon. And in this day and age, HR really is not sort of about the feel-good birthday parties and it's really become a lot about risk mitigation. So how can small nonprofit organizations and their leaders do more and think more about this so that they can mitigate their employee-related risk, which, again, we talked about that in the very first of our time today, that employees, your talent, is ultimately your biggest liability. Well, I think one way to look at this is the employee life cycle. I think this gives a great model for how nonprofit organizations can think about their HR operations and how they can, at each step in the employee life cycle, reduce the friction there, remove the areas of inefficiency and things that just create problems when it comes to their employees being happy and engaged. So if we look at each of the processes, I'm not going to talk about attraction and recruiting. We already talked about recruiting and selection and some best practices there. Let's really jump to the onboarding aspect because this is a huge cost if we don't get this step right. And this is where it all starts, right? In terms of creating that wow experience. And when we talk about onboarding, obviously we're talking about the onboarding documents, all the compliance documents they need in terms of I-9 and their tax withholding documents, reviewing the employee handbook. We're also talking about asset distribution, but we're also talking about really immersing them in our culture, in our mission, who we are, what we're about, our employee value proposition, so that we can also get them ramped up to thinking about that time to proficiency in the role. Onboarding is a very critical part of that. And then we look at developing and growing them, right? We talked already about the data that I mentioned earlier, how so many employees don't feel like they have opportunities for career growth and development in the organization. That's super important to think about. So what are we doing to give them opportunities for growth? What are we doing to develop our leaders to engage them? And do we have good performance management processes in place where they feel like there's an opportunity to offer feedback and to get feedback, which again was also another thing we mentioned earlier on in our time today. Well, now we move to the retention aspect, retention part of the employee life cycle, right? Again, we've got to be very thoughtful about this. How do we continue to keep our employees highly engaged? Because that really is what's going to drive retention. Recognition obviously just starts with just doing it. We've got, again, back to the slide I mentioned, that data where so many, 60% or so feel like the managers think they're recognizing when, about 35% feel like they're not getting recognized. So making sure that we can recognize our employees accurately, that we have great benefits, a great benefit package, which can also define and really help us retain great employees, and then build the capacity of our leaders to inspire and to really get the best out of our employees and what they're are about. And the last step here that I'll mention is separation. Often small organizations, nonprofit organizations, they hurt themselves. They kind of shoot themselves in the foot. It hurts to lose good people, right? And it hurts even worse to burn bridges. What we don't want to do is burn bridges. We want to leave a lasting impression, a positive impression upon them, that leave the door open, especially for the great talent that we have, that they choose to leave. Because often they'll find that the grass isn't greener on the other side, and they may choose to come back. We also don't want them leaving a bad review on Indeed or Glassdoor or some other on-site or online portal. We want them to really rave about the experience they had in working for us and how it helped them. Maybe it was a positive stepping stone for them. HR technology, I'm not going to talk much about this, but there's a lot of great new HR technology out there that can help nonprofit organizations truly eliminate a lot of the manual paper-based work and paperwork and processes that they have that inform HR right now, and add a lot of efficiency and mitigate their risk exposure. And they really truly handle these platforms, cloud-based platforms, handle the entire life cycle of the employee that I just talked about. So as you think about HR operations, we finish up, what's your approach? Well, there's various ways to go about it. Many small nonprofit organizations will do it themselves, and that's fine. But I think as you get over sort of the 10 employee mark, things get a little more unwieldy, and it gets much more difficult to actually have an effective HR operations as you grow, because ultimately something's giving. Something is you're trading time and energy and money that's not being deployed and really focused on the growth of the mission and development of employees. That's being redirected to things like accounting and IT and all the administrative operations like HR. So I think outsourcing offers a very compelling alternative to small nonprofit organizations that want to look at offloading that administrative burden so they can really do focus on the core of their mission and what they're about. Hybrid would be sort of that, well, now we've got to 100, 150, 200 employees. Maybe we do need an on-site HR manager, director, et cetera. But do we want to spend $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year plus benefits, employing them, paying them that high salary while they're doing $15 to $20 hour admin work? That's really soaking up a lot of their time. I don't think that's a great investment and use of their time. So some differences of outsourcing, insourcing, and some pros and cons to really think about, consider for if you make that choice and for your own organization. Numerous trends. Again, there's a large trend for outsourcing and using fractional resources for small organizations so they can optimize the impact of their mission. So I'll just leave you with 3 questions, and we'll leave a little time here for Q&A. To what degree does our current HR structure attract and retain the caliber of talent we're looking for? Do our HR policies compliance offer, actively mitigate our employee-related risk and create the confidence that we need and peace of mind that we need so we can sleep better at night? And does our current approach to HR really optimize for efficiency and managed in a strategic, proactive manner, or is it very sort of reactive? And if so, what steps do we need to take to really change it? So to add to that contemplation of those questions, if you want to really take a good look, and I brought this up yesterday, but for those that weren't on the call yesterday, here is a very simple HR health check. It will take you approximately 5 to 7 minutes to go through it, about 10 questions, I believe. And it will give you an outcome or a score of how are you doing? What does your HR house look like? And are there some gaps that exist that can help you better get your HR house in order? And of course, if you want to review any of those, the outcome with me, or just in general have questions for me and some of the content that I've talked about, I'll throw up my number and my email address if you want to reach out. So with that, let's move to Q&A, and I will turn it back over to Jennifer. Jennifer, is there any questions that we want to answer that come up in the chat, or just, we can give a kind of live mic if there are any questions from those that are on the call.
There are a couple real quick, and 2 of the individuals who asked questions are with the same organization. They are related questions. And you may have answered some of it already, Clint, but I'll just read them for you first.
Sure.
Can you talk about the benefits and deficits of contractual employment and actual payroll employees for small nonprofits? And when we say small, we mean an organization with under $100,000 revenue. And I think a follow-up or a related question to that is that this particular organization had some money last year, so they put folks on payroll. They lost grant money, so they took them off payroll. Now they're working on contracted again. And I know that that can have some issues in and of itself in terms of folks' relationship to work and so forth. So they don't have any developed HR programs. They think that that's one of their next major areas for development. So any thoughts about how to start about that entire situation, how to resource it, how to compensate people, and how to start benefits in an organization that's real small like this?
And you want me to do that in how many minutes? Seconds?
30 seconds. And wow. Yeah.
All right. Well, look, that's a lot. We could probably go on for an hour on that. But I think first and foremost, the Federal Labor Standards Act is the mother of all employment laws. And it really designates and governs and articulates the employee-employer relationship as it relates to W-2 versus sort of 1099 employees. There is a 20, and I can send this out. If any of you want to just send me a quick email where I can send you, there's a 20 item test that the IRS puts out that designates or differentiates what qualifies as sort of a 1099 employee versus a W-2 employee. And it's a very good test to take because you really need to do, because ultimately Department of Labor and their low-hanging fruit that they go after are organizations that are bringing on 1099 contractors when they really should be W-2 employees, because they are acting as if and treating them as if they are an employee, even though they are in a 1099 status. So there are some very important determining factors and a test, really. Again, there are 20 tests there to really go through and review. If you do decide to convert somebody from or just bring them on, and you're trying to make that decision between W-2 and 1099, you really need to review that 20-point test and then make the decision for yourself that says, okay, they meet the test, I'm comfortable to bring them on as a 1099 versus a W-2. You're right, when you mention that, there are consequences, right, and implications of making that decision of I do move somebody from a W-2 to 1099, number one, I got to make sure they make the test to do that. And number two, I lose some of that. Well, there's several things I lose, right? I lose that employee-employer relationship and the ability to really direct them. And in terms of what the work is, what we're trying to do. Second of all, we really open them up to this sort of free individual now. This can go looking elsewhere, and they can utilize their time and energy and focus elsewhere because they are not your employee. So that gets to some of that. I mean, we can get into talking about benefits and the impact of not having benefits and other things that really create more stickiness when you have a W-2 employee versus a 1099. We can talk about some, around employee taxes and other things that when they have a surprise bill at the end, when they have to pay taxes, there's a lot of other moving parts around that. But those are just some highlights I think are important. But bottom line, make sure from a compliance perspective, you don't misstep there because that can be potentially costly.
Just a quick question about that follow up. I mean, is it more of a red flag if you have if you've gone from having staff to having 1099s, it's not a big deal if they're not the same people, right? Like if you decide after an HR person leaves, you're gonna onboard Focus HR or ADP or someone else instead, right? Or
Sure.
your development person goes, you bring on Raise the Bar. But I wonder, is it a little bit of a red flag if it's the same person that has shifted back and forth between payroll and 1099 or not? Like what's your
Absolutely.
experience there?
Absolutely. I'll share you a little bit of experience we had not too long ago. So we received an unemployment claim that all of a sudden became a very, very big issue when an employer had converted a W-2 employee to a 1099 employee. Well, then that 1099 employee ultimately left and filed an unemployment claim. And that created a very significant issue with them because they're like, wait a minute, we don't show this person as a W-2 employee. They're 1099, but they're filing an unemployment claim. It became a big red flag. So yes, the answer to your question is absolutely. It is definitely more of a risk exposure when you do. And that's something, again, the Department of Labor, IRS is going to absolutely look at because you're like, wait a minute, why did they go from W-2 status to 1099 status? Are they trying to get out of payroll taxes? That's absolutely a big red flag you got to be mindful of.
And also, this is not a sales pitch for you, but if an organization has like a third party group helping them, does that help to mitigate that risk a little bit? And I mean, in terms of like one, you might have eyes on it that are different than them, but also kind of like using a CPA. It seems like the IRS doesn't tend to go after people who use CPAs as opposed to people who try to DIY their own taxes or organizations that do the same. Is there any similarity with HR, Clint,
It's an
that you've
interesting
seen?
similarity. And I think, well, first and foremost, I mean, the reason why organizations would hire us is because of risk mitigation. Typically, like they want that peace of mind. But it's one of the very first things that we'll do in an intake assessment perspective is that we'll ask the question. We'll want to know what are W-2 employee statuses, what are the 1099 statuses, that if they have any 1099, and really do that test for them to make sure that they are in compliance with Federal Labor Standards Act, because that, again, it is the mother of all employment laws. And it's the one of the big ones that, if you look at the 80-20 rule, it gets employer organizations in trouble 80% or more of the time when they don't properly classify employees, not only W-2 versus 1099, but also salary exempt versus non-exempt hourly. That also gets employers in trouble because they're not classified. So yes, it's one of the first things we
And
look at. And if there is a change, you bet we're on the phone asking that, hey, why did you make this change? And tell them a little bit about it because we want to make sure they don't make a misstep there.
and sometimes you can fix those things in ways that are more beneficial than if you have to go back after the fact, right?
Correct.
Because you don't want the Department of Labor anywhere near you
No, you
if
do
you
not.
can help it.
Mhm.
All right.
That's not
Um,
a good day when they show up at your door.
yeah. So Anne asked some of these questions, dropped off the call, but I know Satbir works with her, so and will continue to be ears on the call. They did ask, can you put your email in the chat so that they can follow up with you? They want that those 20
The
questions
20 tests.
or to
Yes.
talk to you about that.
Yes.
And
I need my
then
readers on it. I will put that in the
and
chat for
then
sure.
someone also asked about, can they get a copy of the presentation for some of those slides? And we'll go ahead and distribute
Yeah, we've actually
some
recorded this,
version.
so we'll have a recording of this. So we'll have that, which will have the slides and the full recording. We'll put that up and send that out.
The
And then the other piece,
problem is when some of the slides showed there were two slides
yeah,
at the same time. There was
they
some
were
kind of
transferring. I
Oh,
kept on trying to raise my hand to catch your attention, Clint, because we did have an issue with, for some reason, the slides weren't totally converting to the next one. I thought maybe it was just me, and since nobody else said anything, I thought, okay, if I can't reach you, I'll let you go. But
oh, I am sorry
there was a
about
little bit of an
that.
issue there.
My stream is in full presentation mode, so I couldn't see my apologies. Yeah, I can definitely do that and then send that out too. So you have that, put a PDF together and send it out. Yeah. So
And Clint, we did have one other person drop off the call. She had to go, but I had a question for you. I still think it's relevant. And so I'm going to ask it. And that is that, what is the average time a person is employed with a company these days at each level? So at that entry level, the mid manager and the executive, I wonder, I feel like I have a lot of anecdotal data around this, but I wonder whether nonprofits still have kind of a yesterday expectation to employee tenure and then feel like they are failing because they're not meeting that goal, or sort of comparing themselves to um, um, expected tenure that may not be realistic. And so I'll give you a clearer example. I see all the time people in their 70s and 80s who sit on boards and who are retired panic constantly because they think that too many people are leaving the organization. When if you look at it, plenty of organizations, I mean, plenty of people are leaving between 1 and 3 years. They're also often the employees that are like under the age of 30. And so, from these folks' vantage points, when they grew up and you worked somewhere forever or you never left until at least 5 years because you were considered a flight risk, like that paradigm doesn't even seem to match anymore. But I do wonder sometimes if organizations kind of set themselves up for failure because of the expectation that if someone doesn't stay forever, we're failing employees. Can you give some guidance as to what you're seeing in the industry to sort of ground people's expectations and, how long an employee will stay?
yeah, well, I think I had a brief conversation offline about this yesterday about the massive shift in the population of generational employment. We, of course, have seen the baby boomers really retiring, but now Gen Z and millennials fully account for, I think, more than 50% of all employees out there. That's significant. Why? Well, they are not only a different generation, they really are a different culture in how they see the world and in the kind of employment and the kind of work and work-life balance and the kind of growth that they want. They just are different. And so I think it's being a little too optimistic, and we're setting ourselves up for disappointment if we think, coming from a baby boomer perspective, that we think they should work for us for 15, 20, 30 years. That's just not the case. If we get a solid, potentially 2, 3 years out of them, that might be a big win actually in this day and age. They are much, much more mobile, and they are definitely looking for different challenges. They're definitely looking for growth. And we also have to look in the mirror to say, okay, if this is what they want, can we really give that to them? Is there a path for upward movement and or expansion of growth of capabilities or of responsibility in our nonprofit organization? Because if we don't have that and there's no clear line of sight, no clarity about that, then why would we expect that they're going to stay? Even though they like us, and there's nothing personal. It's just there's no real opportunity for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that really makes sense to me too. I know that um, the younger people that have been part of us, some of them have returned once they graduated to do some work with us, but they've also had to get a more substantial job to manage their lives because we can't offer them that in our little nonprofit. I have also noticed that you have to be cautious about when they set up something for us, like I don't know, let's just say something simple like a TikTok account. Say you have to make sure you get all the passcodes, or it's set up in such a way that it relates to the organization and not the person, because then when they're gone, if you don't successfully stay in touch with them, that's gone too, no matter what they've done, because you don't have the passcodes. And we've run into that with some things. And then other things we've been more successful at. I know I personally like to sit down in person, and of course this was pre-COVID, but even now, with the young person that's leaving, and just get them to tell me about some of their experiences with our nonprofit. If they're a person of color, I really want their feedback on how safe they felt, how comfortable they felt, what they saw needed change, and and I just like to know what their dreams are for the future. I mean, I personally like to know that. That's the kind of person I am, and I find that then I stay connected with them for quite a long time. Often afterwards, they'll send me they'll connect me on their Facebook page or their whatever thing it is. And so I really appreciate that you asked that question, Jennifer, because I think it is really important, because I co-founded COPA, Culture Peace Alliance. So I'm in it for life, right? And I can't expect that from anyone else. But I can treat them with a kind of dignity and respect that I want, especially because a lot of times it's very talented people. And I like finding ways to, like, for instance, we have a tech person who is so good. He is like he came in and set up my new router with his phone in 3 minutes, right? And me, I'd struggled for 2 hours and could get it to go, you know. And so it's nice to have someone like that, not as a full-time employee, because we can't offer him that, but as through his engagement with our nonprofit values, he wants to give us at a very low rate, $20 an hour, a very low rate, his tech expertise, And so I think it's when you can cultivate relationships. So I hope I didn't bore them. Cultivate relationships with people that are skilled like that, even if you can't provide them full-time employment or a ladder to success within your own nonprofit. Building the relationship does enable them to want to stick with you for longer in smaller capacities. So those are some of the ways I've mitigated. I've always been contractual. I don't want to be an employee with payroll and all of that. I just deal with the self-employment. I just don't want to. It's I'm 74 and I don't want to, So
yeah. Sapir, we'll hold on just a few more minutes, but I thought it might be good to actually do a formal wrap up here, and I will turn off the recording after that. But before we go, let me go ahead and share one screen with you, because we do. Focus HR does offer a free HR health check, and you can walk through this with your organization and get a sense of kind of where you are. I think we all might know that, but there might be some questions here for you in particular that you'll find interesting. And I thought we'd like to get this up in the actual recording so that when we share it with folks, they have the information as well. So go ahead and
Yes.
take a screenshot or something if you'd
Mhm.
like. And I know that if you submit this, Clint will be back in touch with you to talk about more related to your specific organization. I want to thank Clint for joining us today and everyone who was on the call, even if folks had to step off. Really appreciate you being here and look forward to continuing the conversation again in the future. Thanks, Clint.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you so much.